Hey guys, my name is Dice Rollin'. Today we're going to be reviewing the much-loved Candyman. It was directed by Bernard Rose and was released on October 16th, 1992. The premise is a grad student is researching for her thesis on urban legends, and begins to delve into the local myth of the Candyman. While doing so, she unwittingly summons the Candyman into existence. She has to find a way to stop him as the bodies begin to pile up on his way to get her. So without further ado, this is my review of Candyman. The movie opens with a hearing test. A bit of an introduction ASMR from Tony Todd himself, and an explanation for the urban legend of Candyman. It's your typical teenage myth. Babysitter has a guy over and is ignorant enough to pull some Bloody Mary shit. Holy shit, Ted? Ted Raimi, is that you? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be tormenting Bruce Campbell in the middle of nowhere. After this, we're introduced to our main character, Helen Lyle, played by Virginia Madsen. She and her friend Bernadette, played by Casey Lemmons, are working on a thesis all about urban legends and myths. Helen gets a lead from the two janitors, Henrietta, played by Barbara Alston, and Kitty, played by Serena Grant, who overhears she's researching Candyman. The story they tell her leads her to look up the Cabrini Green apartments, and all the horrific things that have happened there. I would like to point out a pretty glaring issue with this setting real quick. First off, yes, Cabrini Green is a real place, in case you were wondering. I think anyone who lives in Chicago will tell you there are some places you should not go. Every city has these areas. However, historically speaking, Cabrini Green isn't exactly this criminal cesspool that the movie makes it out to be. But, returning to the movie, Helen discovers that her apartment is very similar to the one where Ruthie Jean was murdered. So, she believes that she has uncovered how a very real killer and totally not a vengeful spirit did it.
Killer, or killers, they don't know which, smashed their way through the back of his cabinet. See, there's no wall there. There's only a medicine chest separating us from the other apartment.
The next day, Helen convinces Bernadette to venture with her to Cabrini Green. The problem is that this area is full of gangs. They find Ruthie's abandoned apartment, and Bernadette acts as the voice of reason, telling Helen that they probably shouldn't be snooping around a murdered woman's home in the ghetto. But being the white woman in a horror movie that she is, Helen decides to do some urban X.
Bernadette!
You know, with everything Bernadette's packing in her purse, Helen's lucky she didn't get tased in the face. Because of their snooping around, they meet one of the residents of the apartments, Anne-Marie, played by Vanessa Williams. She tells them that pretty much everyone is scared of Cabrini Green because of Candyman, and that is who killed Ruthie. Later on, during a fancy dinner, this prick, played by Michael Culkin, divulges the true backstory on who Candyman is. His real name was Daniel Robitaille. He was an artist who fell in love with a white woman and had a child with her. So, his right hand was sawed off by a mob who also smeared honey on him, so bees would sting him to death. And, as mobs tend to do, they went the extra mile by burning his body and scattering his ashes at Cabrini Green. This would explain why the area seems to have such an issue with the whole Candyman legend. I can also understand why the Candyman is so pissed. That wasn't just his brush hand, that was his wanking hand. Upon returning to Cabrini Green, alone, Helen meets Jake, played by Taewon Guy, who, with some convincing, leads her to the location of another Candyman attack. And this is why I don't trust public bathrooms. Turns out that the Candyman related to this restroom is actually a person who stole the name to scare people. So, Great Value Candyman and his gang beat Helen up, which is conflicting to me because if this guy had no problem killing a kid, why would he only slap Helen around a bit? Anyway, with Jake's help, Helen lives to be able to point out her attacker to the police. As it turns out, the whole situation brings about some good things. A killer is locked up, Helen's incident makes the local paper and attracts potential publishers who want her and Bernadette's thesis work. Who knew being jumped by a gang could be so great? Except...
Helen, I came for you.
Oh shit. Yeah, turns out Candyman is real, and he's got puns.
Be my victim.
So Helen passes out only to wake up in Anne-Marie's apartment covered in her dog's blood. I'm deducting a point for that. Not only that, but Anne-Marie is hysterical because her baby is gone, and she believes that Helen must have killed him. After some bloody scuffling and fighting, Helen is arrested. Given that the police don't have any reason not to believe she's to blame for the whole thing, Helen's husband Trevor, played by Xander Berkeley, bails her out. The problem here is that the news stations are on that shit, and they're still not sure where the baby is. Given that things aren't looking so fantastic for Helen anymore, she decides to take a look at the picture slides that were salvaged from her smashed camera. In one of them, she finds evidence of the Candyman himself, and shuts the projector off, like it's only a little weird. What more proof do you need that you're in the shit? Well, here's some.
Surprise, motherfucker!
As the Candyman explains, because Helen was disproving his existence, he has to do some killing in order to make people believe in him again. So either he kills Helen or Anne-Marie's baby. Lucky for Helen, or not so lucky rather, Bernadette shows up and Candyman kills her. Given that Trevor finds Helen with a bloody knife in her hand, that doesn't exactly help her plea of innocence. Once again, she's taken into custody, but this time, she ends up in a psychiatric ward. A very drugged up month later, Helen speaks to Dr. Burke, played by Stanley DeSantis, who tells her that this Candyman she claims is tormenting her is all a figment of her imagination. Helen tries to prove her innocence and the existence of Candyman by calling him, but it doesn't seem to work. Whoop. Spoke too soon on that. Candyman frees Helen and essentially tells her they have a date that night. So she runs back to her apartment only to find...
You make another little boo-boo?
You cheating son of a bitch. So what's left for Helen but to return to Caprini Green and keep her promise to the Candyman? Which gives us a scene to make all the bug phobics cringe. Helen then wakes up and hears Anne-Marie's baby crying from somewhere inside this heaping pile of junk. She climbs in there looking for him. Problem is, the residents of Caprini Green think the Candyman is in there, and decide to burn it to hell. This was all part of the Candyman's plan, however, so that he, Helen, and the baby could all be together. Helen has other plans, though, as she manages to get out of the Candyman's grip, and return the baby to Anne-Marie before she dies. And because of her sacrifice, everyone from Caprini Green arrives at her funeral to pay their respects. And if Trevor didn't already start to feel like he fucked up, so, Helen is her own urban legend now, to be whispered about in fear alongside the Candyman. And with that, the credits roll. And now it's time to go over my thoughts on this film. The plot of Candyman was based on Clive Barker's The Forbidden novel, and is pretty interesting for me for a few different reasons. One is that in some ways I can very much see myself in a similar position as Helen. Not necessarily being tormented by a mythical figure with a hook for a hand, but in the way that I'm a curious person who will pursue my subject of interest as far as I can, especially if I'm able to uncover new information, and shed some light on an otherwise overlooked thing. And that's what Helen does. The other reason I like the story presented is because it plays with a certain level of self-awareness in dealing with urban legends. It takes the legends we heard growing up and says, what if that subconscious fear of if a legend was true was right? Candyman is a slasher film with supernatural and romance elements thrown in. It's gritty and dark and unapologetic about it. Now, I am aware that while Candyman obviously has its fan base, there are some people who aren't exactly pleased about some of the things portrayed here. I don't want to gloss over that, but at the same time, I don't feel like I'm the right person to bring it up to talk about. So for that, I highly recommend you watch Horror Noir if you're able. It's on Shudder right now. # not sponsored. Music is an essential part of any movie, especially a horror movie in my opinion. Philip Glass was able to capture the right mood for the right moments. The score could go from soft and delicate for moments of passion and longing, to harsh and tension-filled for character deaths. In a movie like this, it's important for the soundtrack to convey these emotions well, and I really feel that Mr. Glass did just that. The score also stands out among others, and is pretty easy to pick up as being the Candyman score. Practical effects are what make up a majority of what we see on screen, and they're crafted very well. The death scenes are surprisingly realistic with the gore and blood shown. I think the most memorable of these effects is for the Candyman himself. His hook and chest are extremely detailed and lifelike. Also, those were real bees, people. Real bees! I have to say that the team who worked on the art, makeup, and costumes did an excellent job. The actors brought to life characters that could have easily fallen flat, especially the side characters. Xander Berkeley impressed me with being able to play the seemingly doting husband who, as we find out later, was cheating on his wife the whole time. Casey Lemmons' portrayal of Bernadette made me actually pretty sad that she was killed in the end. Vanessa Williams did a solid job with Anne-Marie's defensive nature, all for the sake of her infant son. And the scene in which she realizes that he's been stolen from her regardless is quite gut-wrenching. Virginia Madsen brought a likability to Helen. She was strong-willed and driven, yet vulnerable and uncertain. She really did show a character that was so steadfast and certain in her beliefs, having to go through everything she thought she knew being ripped away. And then there's Mr. Tony Todd. Holy shit. Physically, he brought an ominous and imposing air to the Candyman. But then you add his voice, and here we have nightmares. Granted, I was aware of Tony Todd before I watched Candyman, and I had heard stories about his voice as well as actually heard it in little snippets of interviews. But when I tell you I had to pause the movie the first time he says Helen, I am not exaggerating in the least. Obviously, he did a phenomenal job of playing this horrifying entity, while also showing a certain level of adoration for Helen. With all that being said, I'm giving Candyman 7 out of 10 bloody thumbs up. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like to let me know. And don't forget to leave a comment down below. What do you think of this movie? And if you have any suggestions for other horror movies you'd like to see me review. Also, don't forget to share this video to help the channel grow, and subscribe for more videos like this. See you later.
Be my victim.